The Tragic Last Pharaoh of Egypt, a Mother's Story. She was 17 years old when she became the most powerful woman in the world. By 21, she had given birth to a son who would be king. By 39, she watched that son die in her arms, murdered by the man who claimed to be his friend. And by 40, she took her own life rather than be paraded through the streets of Rome in chains. Her name was Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt. History remembers her as a seductress, a temptress who bewitched Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But that's not the real story. The real story is about a mother who fought an empire to protect her children and lost everything. This is the tragedy of Cleopatra, told the way it should be told, not as a love story, as a mother's desperate battle for survival. Alexandria, Egypt, 51 BC. Cleopatra was 18 years old when her father died and left the throne to her and her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. Egyptian tradition demanded they marry, though it was a political arrangement, not a real marriage. She was supposed to rule alongside him. Instead, his advisors, three powerful men who wanted to control Egypt themselves, pushed her out. Within months of taking the throne, Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria. Her brother's advisors had convinced the young pharaoh that Egypt didn't need a queen, only a king. They raised an army against her. She escaped with a handful of loyal followers and retreated to the eastern desert, where she began gathering forces of her own. She was 19 years old, exiled from her own kingdom, preparing for civil war against her brother. But Cleopatra had one advantage her enemies didn't expect. She was brilliant. She spoke 9 languages fluently. She had been educated by the finest scholars in the ancient world, and she understood something her brother's advisors didn't. Egypt alone could not survive. The real power in the world was Rome. So when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BC, chasing his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean, Cleopatra saw her chance. The famous story says she had herself rolled up in a carpet and smuggled into Caesar's palace chambers. The truth is probably less theatrical, but more calculated. She needed an audience with the most powerful man in the world, and his guards would have arrested her on sight. So she found a way in. When the carpet unrolled and Caesar saw the young queen standing before him, speaking perfect Latin, making her case with the precision of a trained diplomat, he was impressed. Not seduced. Impressed. Caesar was 52 years old, a military genius and politician who had seen everything. Cleopatra wasn't there to seduce him with beauty. She was there to offer him an alliance, Egypt's wealth in exchange for Rome's military power. Help her reclaim her throne, and she would make Egypt a reliable ally of Rome, a steady supply of grain to feed Rome's masses, access to the Red Sea trade routes, stability in the eastern Mediterranean. Caesar agreed. Within weeks, his legions had defeated Ptolemy XIII's forces. The boy Pharaoh drowned in the Nile trying to escape. Cleopatra was restored to the throne, now ruling alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, another child she could easily control. And 3 months later, she gave birth to a son, Caesarion, Little Caesar. The boy's full name was Ptolemy XV Philopator Philometor Caesar, but everyone called him Caesarion, Caesar's son, the only biological son of Julius Caesar, the man who had conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and made himself dictator of Rome. Cleopatra paraded the boy publicly, making sure everyone in Egypt and Rome knew whose child he was. This wasn't just about pride, it was about survival. If Caesarion was Caesar's son, then he had a claim to power in Rome. He was a bridge between two empires. He was insurance. For 3 years, Cleopatra lived in Rome with Caesar, bringing young Caesarion with her. Caesar installed them in his villa across the Tiber. He erected a golden statue of Cleopatra in the Temple of Venus. Roman society was scandalized. Caesar was still married to a Roman woman, but Caesar didn't care. He had bigger plans. Some historians believe he was preparing to make Caesarion his heir, to unite Roman Egypt under one dynasty. Then, March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March. Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times in the theater of Pompey by Roman senators, who feared he was becoming a king. He died at the foot of Pompey's statue, the man he had defeated, the man he had chased to Egypt, where he met Cleopatra. Cleopatra was in Rome when it happened. She heard the news and understood immediately what it meant. Without Caesar's protection, she and her son were in danger. The men who killed Caesar saw Caesarion as a threat, a foreign-born boy with a claim to Caesar's legacy. She gathered her household and fled back to Egypt within days. She was 25 years old, a single mother with a 3-year-old son, returning to a kingdom that was stable only because of the man who had just been murdered. But Cleopatra was a survivor. Back in Egypt, she eliminated potential rivals. Her co-ruler brother, Ptolemy XIV, died mysteriously, likely poisoned on her orders. She elevated Caesarion as co-pharaoh. At 3 years old, he became Ptolemy XV. She was securing his future the only way she knew how, by eliminating anyone who could challenge his claim. For 3 years, Cleopatra ruled Egypt alone with her young son, watching as Rome tore itself apart in civil war, Caesar's assassins versus Caesar's loyalists, and when the dust settled, 3 men emerged to rule Rome together: Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, Lepidus, a military commander, and Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general. Cleopatra knew she needed a new alliance. Octavian hated her, saw her as a foreign threat to Rome. But Mark Antony, he was different. He had known Caesar, he had fought beside him, and in 41 BC he summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus to answer some questions about her loyalty during the Civil War. She arrived on a golden barge with purple sails, dressed as the goddess Isis. Again, history portrays this as seduction. It wasn't. It was political theater. Cleopatra was demonstrating Egypt's wealth and power, reminding Antony that she was a goddess queen, not some provincial ruler begging for Rome's favor. And it worked. Antony and Cleopatra formed an alliance, political at first, then personal. By 40 BC, she was pregnant with twins, a boy and a girl. Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, sun and moon. She now had 3 children, 3 potential heirs, 3 reasons to fight for Egypt's independence. For several years, Cleopatra managed an impossible balancing act. Mark Antony spent time with her in Alexandria, but he also returned to Rome, where he was still legally married to Octavian's sister. Politics. He and Cleopatra had another child together in 36 BC, a son they named Ptolemy Philadelphus. 4 children now: Caesarion, the teenage son of Julius Caesar, the twins, Alexander and Cleopatra, and little Ptolemy. Cleopatra was building a dynasty, a family that would rule Egypt for generations. But in Rome, Octavian was watching, and he was afraid. Afraid of Cleopatra's influence over Antony, afraid of her wealth, afraid that Antony and Cleopatra were planning to create an Eastern empire that would rival Rome itself. In 34 BC, Antony held a ceremony in Alexandria called the Donations of Alexandria. He declared Caesarion the rightful heir of Julius Caesar, not Octavian. He gave his children with Cleopatra control over vast territories: Armenia, Media, Parthia, Phoenicia, Syria, Cilicia, Cyrenaica. To Rome, this looked like treason. Antony was giving away Roman territories to a foreign queen and her children. Octavian used this to turn public opinion against Antony. He didn't declare war on Antony, his fellow Roman. He declared war on Cleopatra, the foreign seductress who had corrupted a great Roman general. The propaganda worked. By 31 BC, Rome was at war with Egypt, and Cleopatra knew that if she lost, her children would die. All of them. Octavian would never allow Caesar's biological son to live, would never allow Antony's children with a foreign queen to grow up and challenge Rome. September 2nd, 30 BC, the Battle of Actium. Cleopatra and Antony's combined fleet faced Octavian's forces off the western coast of Greece. The battle was a disaster. Accounts vary. Some say Cleopatra's nerve broke and she fled with her ships, forcing Antony to follow. Others say it was a strategic retreat that failed. Either way, they lost. Their fleet was destroyed, their army deserted them. They returned to Alexandria knowing the end was coming. Octavian's forces were at the gates of Alexandria. Antony, hearing a false rumor that Cleopatra had killed herself, fell on his own sword. The wound was fatal, but not immediate. He was carried to Cleopatra's tomb where she had barricaded herself with her treasures and died in her arms. Cleopatra was now alone. 39 years old, 4 children to protect, and an enemy at the gates who wanted to parade her through Rome in chains as part of his triumph, the ultimate humiliation for a conquered enemy. She sent Caesarion away first. He was 17 now, old enough to understand what was happening. She gave him money and sent him with loyal servants toward the Red Sea, told him to flee to India, to disappear, to survive. He was the son of Julius Caesar. If he lived, he was a threat to Octavian's power. Caesarion made it as far as the Red Sea port. Then his tutor, a man Cleopatra had trusted for years, betrayed him. He convinced the boy that Octavian had offered him mercy, that he should return to Alexandria. Caesarion believed him. He returned. Octavian had him strangled immediately. No trial, no mercy. The boy was murdered and his body dumped in an unmarked grave. When Cleopatra heard the news, she knew there was nothing left to fight for. Her eldest son, the boy she had raised to be king, was dead. Her 3 younger children, aged 10 and 6, were in Octavian's custody. She would never see them again, and she would not be paraded through Rome like an animal. August 12th, 30 BC. Cleopatra arranged her own death. The famous story says she used an asp, a venomous snake, smuggled to her in a basket of figs. Modern historians debate this. Some think it was poison, something faster and more certain. But the method doesn't matter. What matters is that she chose death over humiliation. She dressed in her royal regalia, the goddess queen of Egypt one last time. She lay down on her golden couch, and she died. Her handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, died with her. When Octavian's men broke down the door, they found all 3 women dead, Cleopatra still wearing her crown. Octavian took Cleopatra's 3 surviving children back to Rome. 10-year-old twins, Alexander and Cleopatra, and 6-year-old Ptolemy. They were paraded through the streets of Rome in his triumph, walking in chains behind an effigy of their dead mother. The humiliation Cleopatra had died to avoid, her children endured in her place. But Octavian didn't kill them. They were children, not threats. He gave them to his sister Octavia to raise, the same woman who had been married to their father, Mark Antony. It's one of history's strange ironies. The children of her husband's mistress raised in her household. The 2 boys, Alexander and Ptolemy, disappeared from historical records within a few years. Most historians believe they died young, possibly from illness, possibly murdered quietly. No one knows for certain. They simply vanish from history. But Cleopatra Selene, the daughter, survived. She grew up in Rome, was given a Roman education, and at 15 was married to Juba II, the king of Mauritania, modern-day Algeria. She became a queen like her mother, ruling Mauritania alongside her husband for decades. She named her son Ptolemy, after her Egyptian heritage. She put her mother's image on coins. She kept the memory of Egypt alive. She died around 5 AD, age 35, the last living child of Cleopatra. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt for 300 years, finally ended. History has not been kind to Cleopatra. Roman historians, writing for Octavian and his successors, painted her as a seductress who corrupted good Roman men. Shakespeare portrayed her as a tragic lover who chose passion over duty. Hollywood made her a sex symbol. But the real Cleopatra was a mother who spent 20 years trying to secure her children's future in a world dominated by Roman power. She spoke 9 languages so she could negotiate directly with foreign rulers. She studied mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and medicine. She was one of the most educated rulers of the ancient world. She allied with Julius Caesar not because she was seduced by his power, but because she needed his army to reclaim her throne. She bore him a son because a child connected to Rome's greatest general was political insurance. She allied with Mark Antony for the same reasons. She bore him 3 children because children created bonds, obligations, reasons for him to protect Egypt's independence. Every decision she made was calculated to protect her kingdom and her children. And in the end, she failed. Not because she wasn't smart enough or strong enough, but because she was facing the full might of Rome, led by a man, Octavian, who understood that as long as Cleopatra and her children lived, they would always be threats to his power. So he destroyed them. He killed her teenage son, he took her younger children and erased their heritage. He turned Cleopatra herself into a cautionary tale, the dangerous foreign woman who nearly destroyed Rome. But she didn't nearly destroy Rome. She tried to keep Egypt independent from Rome, and for 20 years she succeeded, longer than anyone thought possible. Today, we don't know where Cleopatra is buried. Her tomb has never been found. Octavian, who became Caesar Augustus, the first Roman emperor, likely destroyed it or kept its location secret. He wanted her erased from history. But she wasn't erased. 2,000 years later, we still know her name. We still tell her story, though we often tell it wrong. Cleopatra wasn't a seductress. She was a mother fighting an empire to protect her children. She spoke 9 languages, commanded armies, ruled one of the wealthiest kingdoms on earth, and held off Roman conquest for 20 years through intelligence, diplomacy, and sheer determination. She lost in the end because she was fighting an enemy that would accept nothing less than total conquest. Octavian didn't want Egypt as an ally, he wanted it as a province. He didn't want Cleopatra as a partner, he wanted her dead. And he didn't want her children to grow up, he wanted them erased. 3 of her 4 children were erased. But Cleopatra Selene survived, became a queen, and kept her mother's memory alive. And through her, the bloodline of the pharaohs continued for 1 more generation. The last pharaoh of Egypt died at 40 years old, dressed as a goddess, choosing death over humiliation. Her teenage son murdered, her younger children taken from her, her kingdom conquered, everything she fought for, lost. But she never surrendered, and that's the real story. Not a love story, a story about a mother who fought the most powerful empire in human history to protect her children. She lost, but she fought like hell, and history